Hey Fit Pros, before we get to this new episode in the KIPS podcast, I want to quickly share about our newest course on KIPS, Social Media for Fitness Professionals. This course is all about the fundamentals. As a Fit Pro, you know how fundamental exercises are important for building a foundation within an exercise program, and that's what we're going to be doing in this course. Authored by me, Tyler Valencia, I go through the stats involving all the major social media platforms and then show you step by step how to do it. In the first lecture, I built a fictitious business branding kit with a new logo, color wheel, and font. And then we use those to set up new Facebook pages, start a private group, how to use Creator Studio, set up a basic Facebook ad, set up an Instagram, how to post on Instagram, and how to set up a YouTube channel. We do it all in this course, and one of the best parts is you can get your continuing education credits. Head to the link in the description to find out more. Let's get to the show. Welcome to the KIPS Podcast. My name is Tyler Valencia, and I'm the president of KIPS and Time to Train Fitness. We have a topic and a guest one that I love, if you follow me on social media, I compete in something called the Highland Games. And through these games, I met a fellow athlete, a fellow fitness professional, strength coach, that he is going to be talking about working with these types of unique athletes. Himself, his name is Nik Aston. He is a tremendous high-level athlete in the Highland Games and somebody that is just a pleasure to watch as a fan, as an athlete myself, to watch, compete. And he's going to be talking about working with these types of athletes. Nik, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, Tyler. I'm really excited to talk about this topic.
Yeah, it's a great one. It's a fun one for me, just with how long I've been in the Highland Games, and then also just picking at fellow athletes' minds, fellow athletes that are in the strength community that are always looking for those unique training techniques or even just uniquenesses of strength and conditioning. So let's start it off, Nik. Can you give a background about your business, your education, and all that kind of good stuff for the listeners?
Yes, definitely. So I run a personal training business here in Albuquerque, New Mexico called Enchanted Strength Personal Training. I also do some online coaching. I've been doing that for a little over 2 years now. My clientele is mainly strength and conditioning or strength athletes, people interested in competing in Highland Games, Olympic weightlifting, powerlifting, strongman. I work out of a gym called Iron Soul Gym here. Pretty well equipped to deal with all those sports. Mm-hmm. Education-wise, I got my undergrad degree in exercise science from University of New Mexico. I actually initially wanted to go into physical therapy, but through being an athlete at UNM, I was exposed to the strength and conditioning side of things. Really enjoyed my strength coaches I worked with there and decided that I wanted to pursue that career rather than physical therapy, which led me to pursue a master's degree at Appalachian State.
Oh, nice.
So I did my 2 years there. I did my internship and decided I hated every minute of the college strength and conditioning side of things. The hours were terrible. Just through talking to some of the other coaches there, it just became clear that you're not making any money doing that until you're one of the top dogs at the school. And then it's just such a long, drawn out process to get there.
Yeah.
You're moving across the country every couple of years. There's just no job security. You're chasing these different schools, so you're uprooting your life, so I didn't want that. So ended up moving back to New Mexico and started my business here, and I've loved every minute of it. So
Nice. Yeah. I won't name names, but I will say that the guest that's been on this podcast that isn't that realm, the collegiate strength and conditioning, and I think he did it off the record and off of, meaning that I didn't have it recording when we talked about it. Yeah. But he just shared just the political end of strength and conditioning at the collegiate level, and it's a tough one. And I always feel bad for the nonstop moving that he had to go through. Yep. And he might listen to this episode and hear this, and maybe he'll comment when he hears it, but it's definitely a tough one. But working in the private sector of strength and conditioning, I think it does open you up to different opportunities. And that kind of brings us to, what we're talking about today with unique athletes, different athletes, and even with the Highland Games, that's where you and I met. And it's such a unique sport that we see when collegiate throwers come to the Highland Games, they have to go through that period of learning the throws, the implements, all that kind of stuff. But let's kind of set the stage a little bit more. Nick, can you give a summary, a brief description, almost how you describe the Highland Games to someone that's like, wait, what is that? Like, what do you compete in?
Yeah, so it's basically a throwing sport. It's so there's 9 different events, so it's almost like a throwing decathlon type thing. So there's 2 stones, 2 weights, 2 hammers, the sheaf, the weight of a bar, and then the one that people are most familiar with is the caber.
Yep.
Which is the telephone pole, where you got a big guy around a kill, pick up a telephone pole, run with it, try to flip it end over end. So yeah, your combined score with all of those events is what places you overall. So it's not like track and field where you compete in maybe 1 event, maybe 2 events. You compete in all 9, and your cumulative score is what determines the placing.
Yeah.
So they're normally attached to the Celtic festivals. There's been some documentaries and stuff on the Highland Games on like Amazon Prime, HBO, stuff like that. So
yeah. Were you a thrower in college at all?
Yep. I threw the javelin at UNM.
Oh, wow. Nice. So, with yourself now, I know that we're going to talk about working with these types of athletes in just a second. What was that transition? What was that process like for you?
It was pretty tough. Honestly, like the javelin is a really fun event. I loved it. However, I wish I had gotten some exposure to like shot disc hammer, because I feel like those transfer a lot better over to the Highland Games than the javelin does. I was pretty much starting from ground zero. Like I had to figure out how to do everything, because there's nothing similar to the javelin with the Highland Games, really.
With the training though, did you feel like you had that base, that explosive base,
yeah, definitely,
and like the workout room with the weight room experience that helped out?
Yep. Yeah. So being just generally explosive from being a thrower was obviously very helpful. Some of the same positions, but yeah, I spent a lot of time on the field my first season trying to figure out all the different stuff, because there's just so many weird things in the Highland Games that there's nothing you can really do in the gym to mimic. Like there's no way to get better at them without doing the events themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And something that kind of came to my mind right now, and I listened to a certain sports telecast, a radio telecast every day. And he was the analyst, or the host was talking about how you become your habits, how you become your habits. And he was talking about Tom Brady, Russell Wilson, how they are so entrenched in their daily habits and how efficient they are with their habits. And I feel like that's probably something that transferred pretty well for you, is that you're just into that schedule of, here's what I need to do. I need to stick to it. That consistency factor of going to the gym, going to your practices. Those are sometimes the habits or the routines that for new throwers or somebody just getting into the games, I feel like some people, they see the Highland Games, they want to get into it. Maybe they come from CrossFit, they come from Spartan races, and like, okay, yeah, I want to do this. This seems pretty extreme, but those habits aren't the same quite. They're not, you're not running, you're not doing CrossFit, you're doing things that are typically not known to other people, with the rocks, the weights, all that kind of stuff. And then you have to add in the weight room element. So it's on top of that. Right. With yourself, with your routines, do you feel like the collegiate exposure of doing javelin and then just your routine with the nutrition, all that kind of stuff, do you feel like that's a pretty big step for going to that next level within the Highland Games? You are a high level athlete, in my opinion. I think you probably aren't you the highest amateur at the moment? Like, you are there. How much do you think that plays into it?
Habits are definitely a big part of it. I talk about this with my personal training clients all the time, but I view working out and also throwing, because of my sport, as something that I do. It's kind of like brushing my teeth, like it's just built into my day. I schedule things around it. Yeah. And I feel like that is the only way to truly make progress, like the long-term lasting progress to really get you where you want to go, is to make the things that you want to do a priority. Don't leave them for the end of the day. Don't try to schedule it around other things. Like, define the time where you're going to either be out on the field or in the weight room or both, and don't let anything get in the way of that.
Yeah.
So
I like that. I like that a lot. One of the pieces that, you've probably had similar experiences with training where I know a fellow amateur wants to train with you. Oh man, you're so good. I want to come train with you. But then you're trying to, say, hey, like, okay, here's what it takes to, take that leap. And for myself, it's eliminating those excuses of, I got to drive to the field. I got to do this and that. Eliminate what you can, control what you can, and, get out there. Let's now bring this to the programming, to the theory world, we'll call it, with training athletes. And that's something that I don't do as much of these days. The last time I was working with a baseball team, and that was 2 years ago. But, before that, I've worked with volleyball teams, running athletes. Let's see, what else have I worked with? Basketball athletes. And, that is where my education comes from, but I don't work as much in that realm anymore. And with working with athletes, different sports, you hear the term specificity of sport. It's a very popular term, and I feel like that's one that has crossed over to mainstream more, and people talk about it more. And with working with athletes from the Highland Games, throwing athletes, or even athletes that are not as commonly known, with these types of athletes, how do you discuss training with them? How do you try to apply different aspects of training with them? What is kind of your approach to working with these athletes?
Yeah, so specificity is very athlete dependent for me. So with my throwers, just really depends on their strength level, their skill level. Those are the big things that kind of factor into my decisions on how I'm going to approach planning their training, right? So if I've got someone who is really strong coming over from powerlifting or strongman, and they're wanting to get into the Highland Games, but they just have absolutely no throwing technique, then we will probably do a lot more like quote unquote specific type training than if I have someone who's not very strong, but already has really good technique. Mm-hmm. Specificity is mainly going to come from the throwing time on the field. That's number one, regardless of like your skill level. I think I always say this: throwers throw. Like you can be big and strong, but if you don't have the technique, you're going to get beat by someone who's probably not as strong as you. Strength is not everything in the Highland Games. So, in terms of specific weight room work, I've liked incorporating things like explosive push-ups, like explosive upper body work, Olympic lifting, things that just kind of mimic that same speed and snap that we have with throwing. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. But for the most part, if most of my people are more like beginner level, right? So, best thing they can do is just get strong. Yeah. Practice their throwing, and then just get strong in the big basic compound lifts, along with their practice and a little bit of explosive training.
Yeah. Yeah. One of my training areas that I maybe only talked with like one other person about this, but it's something that I feel like each year you kind of figure out something new to try to incorporate more of as you progress through the games. And I'll share one that's probably not as popular with Highland Games athletes, but cardiovascular training. And last year, and probably the last year and a half, I got into cycling. And you're like, what? Cardiovascular training, endurance training? What does that have to do with power sports, explosive sports? And I always feel like I see on Strength Coach Twitter, and that's a whole nother realm. I don't want to get into it. And I don't want to poke at different tweets that come out in that area. But with it, I always feel like I see that on a yearly basis, how mindless cardio and your athletes will build up their endurance base through practice. And you hear those and you're like, okay, like there is some level of that. But for myself with the Highland Games, I felt like building that base, that cardiovascular base with cycling really made a big difference for me last year. The Highland Games, it's basically out there from 9 a.m. until sometimes 3, 4, 5 in the in the evening. It's a long day. And
Yep.
if you don't have that base, it doesn't matter how explosive, how powerful you are, how strong you are. You're just gonna completely just die on the field. I don't want to say that's a bad way to put it. You're just gonna literally just run out of energy. You're gonna empty that tank, and it's not gonna be there. Adding that element in for myself was crucial. That I felt like I had more energy at the end of the day. I was ready to go eat dinner. I was ready to do whatever I needed to after. I didn't feel like I needed to go back to my hotel room and just pass out. And those are things that I feel like it's a trial and error. But where do you lie on the cardiovascular training spectrum?
So that's actually something that I did a lot of this offseason also. I ended up hiring this coach. I'm no longer working with this coach for a couple reasons, but I worked with him for 8 months, basically during the off season, and he was huge on GPP, just cardiovascular training. So twice a week I was doing some type of like CrossFit type WOD or riding the stationary bike for 20, 30 minutes. Mm-hmm. And I think that did do a lot to build up my base of just like fitness. And I do notice a difference on the field. Like that Rio Grande Games, we were out there until 5 o'clock or something. We started early in the morning. It was a pretty long, hot day, but I didn't feel as defeated as otherwise I remember, so.
Yeah, it's one of those ones with, just the sport that we compete in. Cardio is not big on a lot of people's list. It's, the strength, the power, all that kind of stuff. But when you look at the games, and that's part of the uniqueness of it, like we're talking about with the duration of the games, how it's just a long day. And we can talk about the benefits for the heart, for the lungs, all those kinds of things. And it's one of those elements that if you're looking for a piece to add in, I put it up there. I do put it up there just from that experience of it. Now we're talking about working with an athlete that maybe is coming from a different sport, and you're analyzing them. You're starting to look at their unique qualities. Maybe they have good hand-eye coordination. Maybe they have some type of background in Olympic lifting. When you're trying to now work with them, are there any assessments that you typically go through?
No formal assessments. It's kind of just the eye test, right? Like if I have someone who has a 400-pound squat but can't power clean 200 pounds, then I feel like they're lacking some power there. So the training emphasis would be more on building up that power base to kind of catch up with the strength. That way they're able to use that use a higher percentage of their strength on the field and in like the Olympic lifting, more explosive type movements that we do in the gym. So yeah, nothing really formal, just kind of watching the way they move, jumping, Olympic lifting, things like that.
The event that I think would be fun to talk about now that people will see the image that we're going to utilize for this podcast episode. And in it, you're doing a hammer throw in the Highland Games. And it's one that a lot of people talk about for, they bring in mobility. And I have that item listed on what we're going to talk about today with this episode. And it's one where I really do feel like mobility is something that, one, it's not, I don't feel like there's a real solid definition of what mobility is. And two, there is, I think, a misconception of what do you do? How do you train mobility? What is it? Some people might think it's stretching. I don't, but some people might think that. They might think that it's light work. Where do you lie on the mobility spectrum? And what are some things that you like to do with athletes?
So I actually do very little, like quote unquote mobility training myself. I don't do any specific like stretching routine or like foam rolling before or after training. It's never really been a huge issue for me. I incorporate it into some of my clients' programs if I feel like they're unable to get into the positions that I'm asking of them. So like if someone's not able to get into a front squat position, we practice getting in to that position through various different drills and stuff. So it's kind of on a case-by-case basis, an as-needed basis. The hammer throw definitely requires a lot of flexibility. I think just because I practice that, I've been practicing it so often for so long now, I've just kind of built up that mobility and strength in those positions to be able to hit those long, extended ranges of motion. But if someone was not able to do those, I would definitely spend some time doing things like stretching out their abs after training, doing exercises in the gym that kind of mimic that position. Like I'm a big fan of the glute ham sit-up, the GHD sit-up.
Yeah.
Because that just really extends your abs. It kind of gets that end range of motion, and then you have to pull yourself back up, which is very similar to the hammer throw. So
yeah, that's a good one there.
You were talking about something that you added in this year with the cardio, something that I've made a huge point to add in both for myself and my throwers is more hard ab work. So what I mean by hard is like actually heavy, low reps, weighted. So in the past, I've done a lot of like this high rep, like 3 sets of 25, like sit-ups or V-ups or hold a plank for 2 minutes and stuff like that. But this year I've decided I wanted to see what would happen if I incorporated heavy, low rep, like glute ham sit-ups, ab rollouts, suitcase carries, suitcase holds, things like that. And I think that's been a huge game changer for both my training and my athletes.
Yeah, I agree. That's one of the elements that when I go speak at conferences, that's one of the topics I usually speak on. And I know that it's a term that, I know that people sometimes laugh at core training or even anything involving the core. But that is an element that I love to speak on because one, research is finally evolving with it. I feel like we're finally getting solid definitions of what core training is, but trying to incorporate and showcase exercises that aren't just the long holds or crunches. And I do quite a bit of different exercises in that realm that are, they might look like a traditional quote unquote ab exercises, but are weighted and building up that abdominal strength. But the spine working around all that musculature really helps with performance, in my opinion. And the best way that I've heard it explained is with core training. You're basically trying to improve the efficiency of lower body strength, power, whatever term you want to throw in front of that, into transferring into the upper body. And if that chain or if that process is broken or inefficient or weak, whatever you want to say, you can see it huge decreases in those areas. You basically, about another way of putting it is, if you ever hurt your low back, quote unquote, we know that low back pain often doesn't come from just the low back. There's something else in that process that is causing that pain. But if your low back is hurting, you basically can't move. You can't do anything. So figuring out whatever link that is in the chain to improve that process is part of it. And right along with what you're saying right there, finding exercises that are weighted, that are great for building that core strength. One of the ones that if you're listening and you're trying to think, okay, what's an example? Maybe I love to do pull-off presses with a huge load on them. I just get a band, I crank up that resistance on it, and I just hold it 20, 25 seconds, but I'm putting everything I got into it. And in my opinion, those are things that transfer well to different areas of performance or of training. So I like how you mentioned that. And it's one of those things where hopefully they're also more efficient for people too. How efficient is if you're working with clients that you have 45, 50 minutes, an hour with them, is really doing, a long plank hold really didn't do much for them compared to something that's more efficient, weighted. So I look at that with an element that you and I briefly discussed when we met about a month ago, was how you saw how I do a lot of landmine work. And those are things that I have been doing a lot of over the last 2.5 years, landmine exercises, but also I work with Viper Pros, if you're familiar with those. And the term that is used with them is they're three-dimensional, they're multiplanar movements. And with athletes and with Highland Games athletes, unique athletes, I feel like it's something that transfers well because it's a weighted sport. It's something where you're moving through multiple planes and there's a heavy load associated with it. So being able to move with weight, I think, is a very, it transfers well with it. Have you dipped into that world at all?
I'm actually not familiar with those. I'll have to look that up off here. But do you have some videos of you doing that online?
Yeah, it's one of those things that I feel like once you get exposure to it, you start to see, like, okay, I can see this. And then you start to do more, you feel better. And I'm not saying, and this is one of those things where I always have to like emphasize it with it, is that you're not detracting from Olympic lifting, powerlifting, other areas. You're just adding it in. It's another element of training. And with these ones, I feel like I move better. I can move weight better. And I feel like it's one of those elements, as you and we'll dive into more in just a second, that I know that in the sport that we compete in, that I'm not the strongest in my class. And it's one of those that helps me stay competitive because I don't have that elite strength, that elite power. And so it helps me keep that element with it. So with now Olympic lifting, how do you typically start someone? I feel like that's one of those elements where some people that are working with athletes or trying to work with athletes and they want to do Olympic lifting, maybe they don't have the strongest background. What are some tips that you can share with them that'll help them implement Olympic lifting?
Yeah, so I think there are some really easy variations to learn. You don't need to learn the full clean, the full snatch, the full jerk. I really like variations from the hip. Yeah. So hip power snatch is really pretty user-friendly one. Like, it's pretty hard to go wrong. You're picking the bar up from the top, you dip down, you drive up with the legs, and you pull the bar up over your head. Yeah. So that's a huge one that I pretty much start anyone who has no Olympic lifting backgrounds on that. That's the first variation I teach them, just because it's really easy to teach. It's really easy for them to get the concept of, okay, I need to drive up, then I need to change directions to get underneath. And then when people get good at it, they can load it pretty heavy. Okay. Like my power snatch from the hip is actually higher than my power snatch from the floor. Okay. For whatever reason. That's probably something I need to work on technique wise, but I still really like that exercise. And then another one is the behind the neck power jerk. For a similar reason, really easy. It's very similar movement. Dip down, drive up, punch yourself down under the bar. So those are kind of the big two that I start people on, just because they require a little bit less time to learn. You can kind of get the concepts. You can load them up pretty heavy without being a full Olympic lifter. And then as people progress in those, I'll start incorporating some of the other variations, power cleans, power snatches. Then after some time, we'll progress even into the full lifts. But if someone is just like, for whatever reason, not getting it, even after a couple months of really trying it, pulls are really good. So not even worrying about catching, but just doing like a snatch pull, a clean pull. Yep. From different heights. You can do that from the hip, do it from blocks, do it from the hang, do it from the floor, all that stuff. It's still like you're still having to move heavy weight quickly. So I think those transfer over really well. Agree. With the pulls, I mean, when I was working with a team setting, pulls were a lot of what we did. I didn't do full catches just because of the time that it takes and the amount of time that you have working with that team. You don't have much. So doing pulls, explosive movements like that, I think they're great. And with now, I think I kind of want to get a little spicy here. We're talking about powerlifting. Powerlifting, I think, and we'll talk mostly just about back squats and deadlifts here. And working with athletes in general, I think those are commonly debated with, should you be doing them? What type should you be doing? How much load? Where is your belief on incorporating deadlift and back squat? Again, that one for me is just kind of athlete dependent, right? So if someone's already brutally strong, someone's already squatting like over 2 times body weight, 2.5 body weight, 2.5 times body weight deadlift, 3 times body weight deadlift, they probably don't need to be doing a whole lot of that. Yeah. If their throws aren't also reflecting those numbers, right? So, but if someone is still kind of getting stronger, learning to move their body, they haven't quite hit those like double body weight squat numbers yet, then I think those are definitely very important to incorporate just to build that horsepower in order to apply more force, right? Being strong is never a bad thing, but you can definitely go too far with it because those lifts are also very fatiguing too. And a big part of our sport is fatigue management. So if you're doing heavy back squats and heavy deadlifts like twice a week each, you might not be leaving yourself much left over to go out and practice. Yeah. Keep going, right? So I'm a big believer in them. I use them for just about everyone still, except people that are really strong already and there's no real benefit to taking your deadlift from 600 pounds up to 700 pounds when it comes to throwing.
What about with other sports? We'll call them more generic sports, basketball, baseball, football. Were you incorporating a lot of those lifts?
Yeah. I mean, my answer would be pretty much the same for those. A little bit less, probably just, I feel like those sports are a little bit more fatiguing just from a like cardiovascular standpoint. You're doing a lot more practice hours playing football or basketball, like running around during practice than we are when we throw, right? So fatigue management is a little bit more important there. So I maybe, the first one I would maybe cut out would be the deadlift and replace that with just more clean pulls. But I would keep the back squats in. Yeah. But again, just limit the fatigue.
Yeah. A unique item of the Highland Games, as we talked about earlier, set the base, talking about how long the duration of the games is. And with that comes a mindset of it. I think athletes coming from other sports, they start to see how it's one of those sports where you do your throw and then you're waiting, but there is the camaraderie element of it. Of course, you want to be liked by other athletes, but it's a turn on, turn off, turn on, turn off. How do you describe that process that you're going through mentally to stay engaged between throws to, of course you want to win. When you want to win too, you got to stay focused, mentally locking into it. What does that look like for you?
Well, something that really helps me is getting cracked out on caffeine. Just kidding. But I do space out caffeine throughout the day. I think it's a big tool that kind of helps me stay focused, stay engaged, kind of limit that like sapped feeling that sometimes we feel, especially a lot of these games, you'll be in the middle of an event and then they stop you because there's a sheepdog killing, or there's the opening ceremonies where the bagpipe band's got to come march through, and that'll be a 45-minute to an hour process in between your second and third throws, So being like taking some caffeine, hydrating, just kind of eating like simple carbs all day kind of helps me keep my energy up. And then outside of that, like I've got a couple like pre-throw rituals sometimes, like on the weight over bar, like when the bar gets to about like 16, 17 feet, I'll kind of walk away, clear my mind, just kind of give myself one or two cues that I can just really try to focus in on. And then I'll step up to the implement and then go do my throw. But having stuff like that and just kind of using it as needed, kind of step away, clear the head is a big factor, I think. Yeah. Focus on only what I need to do. Don't think about any distractions. Don't think about what the other guy's doing. Just focus on the throw itself.
The elements of exercise psychology involved in sport, and with this sport specifically, I feel like the turn on, turn off, but also the sometimes I'll say I do get some tunnel vision where you're just so locked in with it. And I feel like that does come from practice. You're so locked in on where your foot, where your hand, or where your torso needs to be that it creates that familiarity. There we go. That you just are confident in it. Do you feel like you ever get that you're just locked in enough that you just need that one cue, or maybe that it's an event that you're not feeling good at, that you didn't get enough practice on, that you have to think about it more?
Definitely. This season, my weights have really struggled, and it's not for lack of practice, but it's for lack of practicing inside a box. So I think a lot of my issues with the weights this season have stemmed from practicing, but doing the wrong type of practice, where I'm not worried about like where my feet are ending up or how far I'm driving and stuff. So I've had a lot of foul trouble this season. So that's something I've really struggled with. But then conversely, like I've practiced the hammers quite a bit, and my hammers have really taken off this year, and my stones too. I feel like when I get to a games and like if someone throws a throw that's a little bit further than mine or something, or whatever it may be, I'm able to kind of just hit the gas and really focus in on one or two cues to further my distance.
I like that. Now we're doing a transition here to get some more advice from you, and we're going to get to the podcast takeaways here, and then we'll close it out with some links, sharing all that kind of great stuff. With the podcast takeaways in this podcast, it is an opportunity to get feedback from our guest, to hear and get their perspective on the fitness industry based off of their experiences. That's what I love about this question. And if you've been following along with it, it's one of those ones where I got it from watching a documentary. I think it was on Amazon Prime. I know that I've told this story plenty of times, and I got it from when I was watching this documentary, I think it was called Iron Cowboy, and this individual, I started following him on Twitter, and he was asked about 3 myths about Ironman training. Now, with taking it to this podcast, it is, what are 3 myths about the fitness industry? So Nik, let's hear your advice on here. What, based off of your experiences, all the things you've gone through, what are 3 myths about the fitness industry?
Yeah, a big one that stands out right off the bat is the quote unquote perfect program myth. There's no such thing as a perfect program. What a lot of people don't realize is that consistency is the number one factor when it comes to getting stronger, throwing further, losing weight, whatever it may be, whatever your fitness or strength related goal is, it's going to be about putting in the time. It's not going to be about the 12-week program you bought from some Instagram influencer. So there's a lot of people that kind of just program hop around trying to find that perfect fit when they'd be better off just picking a super basic program and just doing it really well.
Yep.
That's one. And then related to that one is the get fit quick myth. People think they're going to have the ideal body, or they're going to squat 600 pounds or whatever their goals may be. They think it's going to happen quickly. And again, related to that perfect program myth, it's all about consistency. It's not about the 12-week program. It's about doing it over and over and over again for years and years and years.
Yep.
I've heard Matt Vincent talk about this on his podcast, but saying that the best advice he can give someone when they ask about how to get strong or how to throw far is to squat, bench, deadlift, and overhead press once a week each for 10 years and they'll get hurt. You know. And then the last one is the functional training myth. Again, like there's a lot of stuff on Instagram that looks sexy. It looks really exciting. People doing weird stuff with bands, weird stuff with kettlebells, that's not the stuff that is going to make you a freak athlete. Like a lot of I don't know if I want to name names, but like some of those characters online that are training professional athletes and posting about, like, with all these fancy exercise science words about why they're doing what they're doing. A lot of it's nonsense. A lot of it's get clicks, get views, get followers so they can sell their products. Those freak athletes they're training would be freak athletes regardless of how they're trained. So people are a lot better off doing the basic stuff, get strong, get explosive, be athletic. That's how you're going to get in shape, throw further, lift heavier. It's not going to be from doing the next fad exercise on Instagram.
I dig it. The one I'm going to chime in on here is that last one, because it's one that I have friends, classmates that were professional, that worked with professional athletes, with teams, different leagues. And the best things that he would say is, my job is to make sure that they don't get hurt. So we're not going to do the fanciest stuff. I'm going to make sure he doesn't get hurt, because that's my job. And if I was to injure him doing some fancy exercise, then I would get fired. So my job is to make sure that they don't get hurt, and we build a base and they get to that next game. And he would talk about different athletes, very big name athletes. And he would say how none of them either trained, and yet they would go out and just crush games. And so it's always interesting when we talk about that thing in different episodes, but it's so true. I mean, sticking to the ones that you mentioned before with just the consistency factor and getting down in your foundations, all very true. So Nik, great episode here. Before we sign off, can you share your website, social media links, any of that kind of stuff?
Yep. My website is enchantedstrength.com. Social media, you can follow my personal account, Aston Strength and Throws, on Instagram. And then my business Instagram is @EnchantedStrength.
Great. And I'll make sure to include those in the description of this episode, hyperlinked, all that kind of great stuff, so you can follow Nik. Thank you, Nik, for coming on the KIPS podcast, sharing some great information, talk about the Highland Games, getting that information out there. I think it's such a great sport, and hopefully people listen. They feel motivated to go to a games. These games are in every major city, small cities across the country, and hopefully you can join the community as well. Nik, thank you for coming on the episode.
Thank you, Tyler. It's a lot of fun.